People who have jobs where you go inside homes, what's the worst thing you've seen? Not a current job that I hold, but I used to be a funeral director and I had to go into someone's home who died and the police had to kick the door in and call us out. It was the worst thing I have ever seen. She had rubbish everywhere and looked like she never chucked anything away. She had a cat, and we couldn't see any litter tray anywhere, just cat crap piss in random corners and more hair on her clothes furniture than on the cat likely. We never saw the cat, so I bet it was buried under all her rubbish. The worst thing was how she died. She must have had some form of stomach cancer because she had died choking on her own poo as she vomited it up. What happens is that if you have an obstruction in the gut, such as a tumor, sometimes it gets trapped, and the body forces it upwards, and in her case, she had sicked up her own crap and literally choked on it. It was everywhere, coming out of her nose, mouth, and in bags around her, including the one she was still holding when she died. Loads of blood, too, so I don't doubt her esophagus was injured or somewhere in her digestive tract. I don't know how me and my colleague didn't get any on our cess courts. Even the police struggled to not stand in any blood or crap that day. It has stuck with me for the past year after seeing it, which is no easy feat as I have seen a few putrid sights. Story 2. I used to do domiciliary care for women who had just had a baby. For the first 3 days that they were at home after being discharged from hospital, we would go and visit them and check to see how they were all getting on. I went to one house where there was substances paraphernalia everywhere. Aside from works that were clearly being used to cook up, there were tons of mobile phones and lots of things that were obviously stolen goods. It was a really weird situation in that the partner was desperately trying to hide all the stuff while the woman didn't seem to worry that much about it. She was all but pointing things out to us. He was obviously high as duck, though she appeared completely clean and sober. Of course, when we got back to the hospital, we informed the authorities. It later turned out that the woman hadn't told her partner that we were going to be coming around because she wanted desperately to get out of the relationship and needed help doing so. She didn't think anyone would believe her in terms of how bad it was, both the substances and the emotional abuse she was suffering. So she wanted us to see it so that we could reliably step in and get her and the baby out. Story 3. One of our clients had a water line breakage in their home and called in a claim. Our claims adjuster went out and then called us back immediately telling us he had just got done throwing up and we needed to get off this policy immediately. It turns out they had converted a bedroom into a litter box room. Instead of using litter boxes, they just dumped new litter into the room on the floor. He said the litter was about 2 feet high, filled with excrement, and the whole house smelled so bad it made him sick. It was also a hoarder-esque type situation with piles and piles of trash everywhere. We had to go out and investigate, and his descriptive phone call didn't scratch the surface of how bad this home was. Come enter. I'm an EMT, and just last week we had an arrest in a litter box house. When we were working it with the fire department, one of the medics went into the kitchen to see if she could find a DNR and found 3 dead cats in various stages of decay. Keep in mind this patient arrested minutes ago at this time. The ED still is talking about how bad the patient smelled. We couldn't get the ammonia and cat litter smell out of the ambulance for the rest of the shift. And keep in mind this was an 8 a.m. call, and we work 24-hour shifts. 8. Doing my laundry the next day, my clothes made my house smell like hers. Grossest call. Story 4. It's strange. Had a lot of jobs, been in prob thousands of homes, and I've forgotten almost all of them. Few stand out, though. Yeah, there are the roaches, spiders falling out of vents, the smells, the trash. People are pretty gross, but the worst was sad. Older-ish lady who made me take off my cess courts. Perfectly clean house and not a speck of dust. Plastic on the couches and not a thing out of place. I realized I needed to get in a room and told her, and she immediately did the, no, it's terrible in there. It's my daughter's room. And as always, I'm like, no, it's fine. I've seen it all, and a messy kid isn't anything to be worried about it. After some prodding, she finally let me in. Mattress was torn up and blood-stained, blood and crap, feces on the walls. Holes in the walls and trash everywhere. The lady started crying, and then mom, told me daughter, was an addict. And mom, tried redoing the room multiple times. But daughter, always tears it up again. Real sad. Story 5. Friend is a realtor with a bunch of crazy stories. She said she had a client wanting to sell his house. No problem. My friend sends a coworker out to take pictures of the place. When the coworker shows up, she says that it might be hard to use the pictures because the house was damn near covered in penises. Statues, pictures, paintings, shrines, and so on. It was like a museum of penises. The owner decides to have a yard sale to help with the realtor fees. My friend goes over to help the customer with what he wants to sell. Going through everything, she discovers he has bed bugs. She said they ended up going through 3 rounds of bed bug treatment before the yard sale. She was trying to convince him that 1, nobody wants all your penis stuff, and 2, everything is covered with bed bug treatment. He was very adamant about doing the yard sale, and sure enough, he sold all his stuff. Story 6. I was a paramedic for years. I encountered many homes in severe disrepair or in hoarder status, but one in particular comes to mind. It was late morning, early afternoon one day, and we received a call for assistance. I do not recall the nature of the issue itself, but it was non-life-threatening. We responded to what is normally an upper-middle-class neighborhood with nice-sized family homes. As we arrive at the address, I knew it was going to be an issue from the get-go. This address appeared to be abandoned from the exterior. The outside of the house was in okay shape, but it didn't appear as though any sort of maintenance had been performed in years. Grass as high as the Serengeti, fallen tree limbs littering the front yard, overgrown bushes, etc. The bushes closest to the front door were so overgrown that it was inaccessible. We decided to go to the back door instead. To get to the back of the house, we had to walk down the driveway in a crouched position because the trees were so overgrown it was impossible to stand straight. The backyard was fenced in, so we opened the back gate and made it to the back door. By this time, our city fire department also arrived to assist us, as is common on most medical calls. The back door was heavily crowded by an overgrown tree as well, but not to the point where we could not gain access. We knocked several times, but nobody came. We confirmed with communications that this was the correct address before we entered. The back door was unlocked, so we opened it and announced our presence. Moments after opening the door, it became evident that we were in over our heads. The back door opened up to what I imagine was the living room in front of us and the kitchen to the left. There was an unforgettable odor of mold, stale garbage, urine, and feces. It was quickly apparent why this was the case. There was no floor visible. The entire floor of the house was covered in at least 1 foot of trash. Literal trash. Empty chip bags, crumpled paper, discarded rotten food waste, old torn magazines, you name it. The trash had become the new floor. The fireplace in the living room was filled with ash, to the point that there was a pile of it spilling out several feet onto the floor of trash. Years of fires having never been cleaned out. Sitting in the middle of it all, covered in trash like a blanket covering his legs, was our patient, probably mid-30s, early 40s, morbidly obese, over 600 pounds, nude. He reports that he had fallen over a week earlier and was just unable to get back up. When asked how he had been sustaining himself, he said people from his church came by several times a week to bring him food and drinks. Yet, despite this, it took until now for somebody to let us know. They would come give him the food and leave. The conditions inside the house were worse than I can describe. It was so bad we had to all wear HEPA masks, and the fire department wore their CBA for safety. It was so dirty, dank, and musty that the air itself was deemed harmful to even breathe. Bear in mind that he has been in that spot on the floor for over a week now, buried in years' worth of trash. That spot had been his bed and bathroom. He urinated on himself and defecated on himself for over a week in that same spot. It was summertime in the South, and he had no AC. The effort to get the patient out of the house and to the hospital is another story on its own, but I will mention that it involved the fire department having to cut trees down just to get him to the ambulance. One of the police officers that was also there reported that all the toilets were overflowed and that the bathtub was filled with water so stagnant it had turned green and had mosquito larvae living in it. I found out that a few hours after we had transported the patient, the city actually came in and condemned the property. It was so bad. The dude was really nice too. He had lived there for years, but was unable to keep it up, but too proud to ask for help. So instead, he lived in utter squalor, worse than any crack house I'd ever been in. I think about that guy regularly, wondering where he is today, and if he ever made any improvements to his situation. Story 7. Used to work for a service company that would respond to apartment renter issues. Walked into a studio apartment at an upscale complex for a reported issue with the dryer. As soon as I walked in, a majority of the walls were covered with 18+ magazine. The renter tore out hundreds and hundreds of pages from dirty magazines and tacked them to the walls. Everything else was normal and clean. The furniture was clean, the floors were clean, no evidence of hoarding of any kind. Kitchen was spotless, no smells or odors. Apartment was fully organized, but just 18+ magazine all over the walls. Story 8. I used to clean carpets. We went to a double-wide trailer once that had about 20 cats inside, plus 3 dogs. I didn't see a single litter box, and by the time we were done, the slate gray carpet was almost white again. The ammonia smell inside about made me puke, but the old couple that lived there acted like nothing was wrong. Story 9. It was a while ago, but one guy's house had a hole cut between 2 floors and had a lovingly maintained old Victorian steam-powered concert organ set up in the hole. Not necessarily bad, just odd. It was a regular suburban house. Owner was super weird though. The rest of the house was filled with garbage and smelled like cat pee. Story 10. I was a realtor showing a house that had a tiny powder room. The owner had attempted some kind of faux finished sponge painting technique in bright red over white walls. It looked like someone had pulled out a full tampon and helicoptered it. Story 11. This one is bad. Not so much for its gross factor, but rather the circumstances. I used to work in pest control in a major city, and this included so low-income rentals. I was inspecting for bed bugs, when sure enough, I found them in one of the units. Being that this was a number of years ago, it was and probably still is standard practice to toss out the mattress entirely. Have you ever tried to tell someone who probably has no disposable income that they need to throw out their mattress and buy a new one? That pretty much killed my day. When I first started with this company, the resurgence of bed bugs was still a pretty new phenomenon, and credit to my employers. They moved quickly in researching and improving our approach. We eventually moved on to recommending mattress covers certified for bed bugs, heat treatments, and even integrated a bed bug sniffing dog. We also started doing lectures for hotels in the area, training the staff in what to look out for as they were cleaning rooms, and I would translate in Spanish. I live in a state where bed bugs are super common, and I got them when my downstairs neighbor decided to go to the local hardware store to pick up a bug bomb instead of hiring a professional. Those home bug bombs don't kill them, but just make them flee the area, pun intended, and they moved into my apartment. We hired someone to spray the whole place, use little cups that go under the bed so they can't climb up the frame, bought mattress and box spring protectors, etc. We were able to use the mattress for another 6 months without issues thanks to those protectors and threw it out when we moved. Story 12. I used to clean carpets for a living, and we were sent to a Section 8 home that had recently had the electricity shut off. We went in to survey the situation, and after locating a flashlight, realized the 6-foot-high mound in the living room was all dirty diapers. We did not clean that carpet. I cleaned that. Story 13. The bathroom floor covered in feces and urine, floor stained brown, and I had to clean it on my damn hands and knees. Going to quit this job this week. Story 14. I deliver food for my restaurant, and one time I pulled up to the gate of this house. The resident told me to just come inside and deliver the food since she was wheelchair bound. Okay, cool. I get to the door and I discover a biometric fingerprint scanner that unlocks the door, along with a camera. I press the doorbell and the resident opens the door. I take the food to her in her living room, and as I look around, this lady has an electronic code lock installed on her fridge, pantry, and the back door to go outside is card accessed only. The garage door is quadruple bolt locked, and the windows have window-sized garage doors on the inside. I hurried the duck up out of there and told my manager to never put me on delivery runs again. Story 15. I used to work for a company that did fire, water, and mold cleanups. We got called to a mold cleanup due to water damage, and these people were hoarders. Useless crap stacked to the ceiling. All of it had to get tossed due to being in contact with a really toxic form of mold. So once we reached the basement and were tossing crap, we find 2 cat carcasses. The whole basement smelled terrible. We knew something was up, but we couldn't really put our finger on it until we found the dead cats. The owners just shrugged it off. Disgusting people. Story 16. I did remodels for a while. The worst one was a legitimate hoarder. That house was disgusting. She had to clear a path for us to get to the bathroom with our tools so we could work. Lots of cats, too. The house smelled very strongly of cat piss. I'll never forget when I went to the back looking for the water hose. There was a pool filled with disgusting algae-covered water and a dead cat floating in it. I was very happy when that job was over. At least her bathroom looked great. Story 17. I could write a book. Roaches effing everywhere, crawling on the homeowner. They don't seem to notice. A live possum that got in and won't leave. Dead animals that were left where they expired for extended periods of time. Story 18. Heating company person here. We went into a home to install a new furnace, but turns out he needed a new heat run put into the bathroom upstairs. I should also mention that the dude has been without running water, electric and gas for about 2 years. Guess what we found piled up all over the bathroom floor? I honestly don't know how he was living there, but we called some people to get him the help he needed. It was poop. Story 19. When I was in the Air Force, I had to pull some first sergeant duty while the actual first sergeant was on leave. The first sergeant was responsible for the morale and well-being of the troops in the unit. We responded directly to the commander with any issues. We got a call to report to a troops house in base housing. When we got there, CPS was outside and the cops were inside. When I got inside, it was the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen. Dog crap everywhere. On the floors, on the beds, counters, piles of dirty clothes in the bedrooms, dirty dishes piled up high. The troop was deployed to the Middle East. It was just his wife and kids in the house. The wife truly didn't understand what was wrong and why her kids were being taken away. Her husband got recalled from deployment to deal with it. I don't know what the final resolution was, since the actual first sergeant came back and took over the case. I was happy to hand it over. Story 20. I was a cable TV guy in the 80s and a TV tech in the 90s. I've been to hundreds of homes from New Jersey to Washington. I've seen a lot. I've been to high-rise ghettos, scary desert trailers, and filthy welfare homes. But the worst was Mrs. Smith. She was elderly and lived alone in a trailer in the woods of Washington state. She wasn't completely alone. She had a whole herd of little yap dogs and a few cats. She was hoarder and wasn't very big on cleaning up. As soon as she opened the door, the acrid stench of urine burst into my lungs. She waved me in. The electric heat was set to extreme, which didn't help the smells. The carpet was filthy and squished and crunched underfoot. Squished from the urine, crunched from the ground-in cat litter. The smell was so overpowering I had to suck in air through my teeth. Mrs. Smith yelled at her dogs the entire time. "Pepper, you're get away from the man now. Settle down, Pepper. Pepper." This was repeated so often that 20 years later I can still hear it. Her wooden console, Grandma TV, was bad, and she had an extended warranty that covered everything. A previous tech had found the CRT was bad. I was dispatched to replace it. Now kids, replacing a big CRT and a TV was a tough job. You had to gut the TV, replace the CRT, then spend a lot of time adjusting the magnetic yoke, the three colors, the equivalent of gamma, and the corner correction to minimize ghosted images. On a good day, with no errors, this was a 2-hour job. There was no way I could survive 2 hours in that house. When my knee hit the carpet, it went squish and crunch and got soaked with pee. I thought hard and fast and told Mrs. Smith that due to the size of the job, I had to work outside. I hauled that enormous heavy TV outside and put it on some cardboard. It was already dark outside, so I set up lights. The new CRT went in okay. I ran an extension cord from the house and did the CRE and yoke adjustments with my pattern generator as an input signal. I got it as close as I could. Then I hauled the TV back inside and connected it to cable TV. To my relief, she was happy with the picture. It wasn't my best alignment job, but it was good enough. She signed the paper as I held back vomit. Once outside, I breathed in the cold night air in huge lungfuls. This staved off the vomit. I went home. Next day, I approached the tech who ordered the part. "Joe, what the heck? That house was disgusting," he laughed. "Hey, the part was bad. I ordered it. Not my problem you got dispatched. Oh, she renews her extended warranty every year without fail. You'll be back." Fortunately, I got laid off that summer. Story 21. Not my story at all, but I've seen a news article where they found several dead cats in some hoarder's house. One of the cats was so desperate for water, they found it dead halfway hanging out of the toilet bowl with the cover stuck on top of it. So sad. Like, who cares if you hoard but don't make other creatures suffer for it? Story 22. I walked into a house where a family had 2 dogs that they'd trained to use those pee pads. But instead of throwing them out, they just laid a new one on top. The stretch was bad, but the ammonia smell actually burned my nose. How people can go nose blind to that, I'll never understand. Had a hoarder once in a giant multi-million-dollar home. I worked my way through a path to get upstairs and saw that the only accessible area was the master bed. And even then, only a 2 feet wide path. Down the hall, I could just make out 6 bedrooms and probably a bathroom, but crap was stacked up nearly to the ceiling, making it completely inaccessible. The woman that owned the home said she hadn't been down to the end of the hall since the early 90s. I've seen lots of hoarders. It usually catches me off guard because it can be any house or apartment. They can look completely normal from outside. Story 23. Not a job, but I moved out of my apartment and told the girl living there that I'd be back the next weekend to clean my room and the common areas, living room and kitchen and bathroom. She was notoriously dirty, and I wanted to make sure that I received my deposit back. I took the items that I paid for. She was incapable of shopping for items. I took the remaining toilet paper, leaving the partial roll, my shower curtain, my pans and plates and dishes, my food, and the rest of my stuff. I came back a week later to find rice covering the floor. She didn't have pots or pans, and instead of buying one, she attempted to cook using one of her plates. By the evidence of the half-melted plate on the stove, with congealing food in it, why the stupid git didn't use the microwave. She had also melted a kettle to the back burner. I had to buy 2 replacement burners for the stove. She stopped using the toilet when she ran out of toilet paper, left it unflushed, and started using the bathtub. Bits and pieces still clinging to the back of it where the shower head wouldn't reach. Plates stuck to the floor under the couch. Snotty tissues covering her bed, so she was sleeping in her snot tissues. She had flunked out of the graphic design program and took it rather hard. Food in the bed, crackers, pancakes, syrup, were just some of the recognizable foods. Food everywhere, actually. I found that she had been stashing her empty Slim Fast cans in her dresser. There were just so many things to clean, it was gross. Story 24. Used to clean up apartments after people had moved out. Been evicted. One apartment was Section 8, and the tenant who was receiving the Section 8 got cut off because she broke a bunch of the Section 8 rules. Apparently, the last 6 months of her living there, she had actually moved out and turned off services, but still let her kids live there. Late teens to early 20s, I think. So, the kids who lived there trashed the place. When I got there, the floor was covered by 2 feet of trash, clothes, broken furniture. Food had been left to rot all over, and the place was filled with bugs and fleas, and it smelled like a garbage dump. The worst, though, was the bathroom. The water hadn't been on in a good long while, but they kept crafting in the toilet until it filled up. Then, when that had gotten full, they shat into the bathtub and into 5-gallon buckets that they had left around the house. All in all, it was about 200 pounds of human crap in the tub. I had to bag it up in 1-pound bags, bag that bag, and then put no more than 5 bags in a sealable pail and take it to a special waste treatment site. Second to that, was the 5+ bedroom party house that a bunch of professional snowboarders had lived in for a year or two. They got evicted for not paying rent, or something like that, and they had thrashed the place before they left. The worst thing in that place was that there was a gap, maybe 3/4 of an inch, between a bathroom vanity and a piece of glass for the shower enclosure. Someone, or maybe all of them, decided that they were going to store their used condoms there. At least 100 were stuck in there. It was gross, moldy, and eventually we had to rip out the vanity because that was the only way to ensure that it was clean. Story 25. Tenant who had turned a house into a hoarder house. She always paid on time, and there were never any issues with her, so I let it slide. I didn't know she was a hoarder. Wanted to add that as on reread, it sounds like I knew it, but let it slide. I did not know. The yearly inspection she managed to put off again and again. I finally posted a 24-hour entrance notice as I had to get it done. With or without her. She called me crying, begging me not to go in. I was like, gotta be done. Can't wait anymore. The house was basically piled 6 feet high with just layers of random crap. A tiny little goat path led from the front door to a tiny portion of a bed that wasn't covered. Guess she slept on 1/4 of a twin mattress. Back to the toilet. A second bedroom was completely filled to within 6 inches of the ceiling. The bathroom had the door removed as it apparently could no longer be opened and closed after a point. The basement was also completely filled as a bonus. Some crap had shifted in the basement and knocked a water line loose. I don't really know how much water was in the basement, but I found plastic storage containers in the mess, the top of which was at least 4 feet off the floor that were filled with water. It took over 200 man-hours to clean out after she was evicted. We cleaned out over 80 cubic yards of just random, cheap crap and trash. As we dug through it, we tried to keep family pictures and crap separate, but after court, she never bothered to come pick them up. I disposed of that stuff after a year. Her son came by one night with his father, ex-husband, who he moved in with after his bedroom was completely full of junk, asking about a rare and valuable heirloom firearm that was in there. The father wouldn't leave us alone about it. Voicemail after voicemail. We must return his gun. If we don't, he will sue. ECT, ECT. This slowed work considerably as they had no idea where it was, or if it was loaded. No one wanted to get gut shot moving crap, so it went from grabbing crap en masse to having to pick through it looking for the ducking gun. Finally found the gun in the closet of the completely packed bedroom. It was a cheap Saturday night special. In perfect condition. It would go for about $80 in the used market. It was a rusty piece of crap, though. The father was a felon, so we called the cops and arranged for them to be present, called the father to collect it, and he caught a felon in possession of a firearm out of it. But hey, he had to have it back, and we did return it. It was weird as we dug through it. We would regularly find caches of canned food, TP, bottled water, and random household goods. Best guess? She would buy a cache to use. Then once it got covered to the point she couldn't access it anymore, she would buy another cache. Something like 20 cases of TP were recovered, and like 50+ gallon bottles of vinegar. But yay, she managed to somehow do all of this in less than 14 months. 80 cubic yards of crap thrown away as an example. That is 4 full to the brim dumpsters that are 22 feet long by 8 feet wide by 4.5 feet deep. After the experience that I sold off the handful of individual houses I had that I rented and have stuck to multi-unit buildings only ever since. I figure with multi-units, at least there will be other tenants to hopefully inform me of weirdness like that while it was happening. After the damages portion of the eviction was done, I was left to collect a $5,000 judgment. And to her credit, she paid it off in small monthly installments over a few years. Unfortunately, I heard that the next landlord that got her actually got the exact same situation, but somehow even worse than I did. Hoarders are basically incurable. Story 26. Probably not what you meant, but I had a job that required me to enter abandoned houses. Saw more cool stuff than terrible things, but some things that stand out. Opened a drawer and found a baby pacifier and a crack pipe next to each other. Maggots wriggling in a tray of decomposing eggs. Saw one bathroom in a house where the septic system was compromised. Human waste had spewed back up through the pipes and coated the floor, tub, toilet, and sink. Various murder sites. Bit odd, but no visual indications of what had happened. One basement with pictures of women from magazines with their eyes scribbled out so hard the paper was torn. Lewd comments written around them. That basement felt wrong even before I saw those pictures. The stairs felt wrong. Hall felt wrong, hard to describe. The rest of the house seemed fine. Another house had been the playground of metheads. Found syringes, crack pipes, razor blades nailed down to the windowsill. So much. 18+ magazines. Pretty standard, but that house was special. One basement with the lock turned round the wrong way and the door jamb kicked in. Walls in the basement were covered in plastic similar to Dexter's kill locations. Story 27. I work in the restoration business. Deal with insurance companies' claims for water, fire, mold, etc. I had just started my job a month before I was sent to the worst house I've ever been in. There was a house that the bank took from someone because they defaulted on the mortgage. I was sent in to clean the house out. She was a hoarder. She had no running water and had not once taken her garbage bins to the curb. Not even kidding, they were the cleanest things on her property. 2 garbage bins that were spotless, not a speck of dirt inside them. The house, however, had 18 of garbage covering the whole floor of the house. Pringle cans everywhere, full of crap. A pile of used pads beside her bed, as high as my waist and about 4 in diameter. Tea bags piled from the top of the counter to the bottom of the upper cabinets. A pile of used toilet paper taking up every bit of her bathtub and about 4 feet higher than the top of the tub. There was a spot under all of the garbage that she was burnt clothes and a big burn mark into her hardwood floor. Mouse crap everywhere and dead mice. It was also the middle of the summer when I had to go in. It was about 25, 30 degrees Celsius out over the 4 days I was there. We filled 2 massive dumpsters up with garbage. That was easily the worst 4 days of my life. Story 28. I used to help my dad paint houses when I was in high school. One day we went to help a family friend by painting the inside of their guest house and found that the previous tenant was really into crack and powder, and apparently was prone to not only pissing, but crapping on the carpet too, and even threw up in places for good measure. Before we painted, we had to pull up the carpet. And I don't know if you've ever pulled up carpet before, but I can tell you it's only made worse when it smells like crap. Story 29. I used to work for an apartment complex as a maintenance guy for all of 4 months. Anyway, there were reports of a weird smell coming from some middle-aged woman's apartment. She was behind on her rent, and an eviction notice was sent out, so we assumed that she bailed. Well, she didn't bail. She damn died in her bathtub. The stench and sight alone were enough for me to never go back to that job. Story 30. I used to work for a big cell phone company. As with what comes with the job, I had to be in a lot of people's houses. The places I visited ranged from an Italian mafia's house to a clock collector's house to a house in the worst part of Lake Worth, Florida. Most of the houses I've been to left a slight impression on me. Let me see into people's lives that is usually private, but those 3 stood out to me. Being on topic, the last house was the worst house I've ever seen in my life. First off, when we showed up, the yard was covered in trash. I mean, literally covered. The owner could have told me she lived on a landfill, and I would have believed her. Problem is, when she answered the door, she immediately stammered out about raccoons getting into the trash and making a mess of the yard. My trainer and I didn't even ask, didn't say anything about the yard. We just wanted to get this one done very quickly. So as the owner is showing us where she wanted everything, I noticed about 2 inches of grime everywhere, floor met wall. I have no idea how much built up over time. The floor was okay-ish. The only thing I could come up with is she mopped without sweeping and didn't care about the edges of the floor. Yes, I had to dig into the grime. Yes, I had to wade through the landfill backyard. Yes, I tucked my pant in my boots and put gloves on. Well, the gloves were after I grabbed the old Comcast box and had to peel it off my hand. Trust me, I was so happy to finally finish that job. I checked myself for roaches after. Surprisingly, I didn't have any on me and didn't see any bugs at all in the house. Story 31. I worked with durable medical equipment a while back. We delivered and set up equipment like oxygen concentrations, hospital beds, wheelchairs, and so on. I was dispatched out to repair a hospital bed that wouldn't raise and lower properly. This is typically caused by a connecting rod coming loose under the bed. I was greeted by the caregiver and saw the patient across the room just hanging out in his wheelchair and watching TV. After asking what the issue was, I went over and slid the bed out from against the wall and was greeted by a large, opened box overflowing with sex toys. Wooden ones, 2-footers, pink with glitter, short and stout. You name it, he had it. I went wide-eyed for a split second, and at that time the caregiver must have remembered the stash hidden under the bed because she came in and brushed it off with, "Sorry for the clutter. Mr. X is pretty peculiar with his room." I never find out who those things belonged to, but I told my coworkers to keep an eye out when his name came up. Another time I was dispatched for an equipment pickup. These are hit and miss because either the patient is better and no longer needs their equipment or they have passed, and the family wants those items out of the home. The house was well lit on the outside, but it didn't seem like anyone was home by the looks of their living room, visible from the porch. I knocked and waited for about 2 minutes before I heard a faint, "Come in." I let myself into their poorly lit home. The glow of an old mosaic lamp in the corner gave the entire home an eerie vibe. There's not a soul in sight, so I call out, "Medical Equipment Company! Here to pick up some items for you, Mrs. X." I then hear that faint voice again saying, "I'm in here. Come down the hall and in the room to your left." Now, the majority of the patients we work with usually need ambulatory aid or are sometimes immobile, so wandering around a house to greet the patient wasn't weird to us. As I made my way down the hall, I hear the faint voice get louder and louder until I enter the room where it was coming from. There, laying on the ground, was a little old lady with a smile on her face. On top of her lay her now deceased husband, who had passed in the morning. As she tried to readjust him, his corpse fell on her and kept her down there until I was able to make it over to her. I rolled the man's lifeless body off from her and called for the funeral home to come get the body. Story 32. Similar story to one on here. I worked for Geek Squad for a few years doing in-home computer services. Pulled up to a house out in the country, and when I opened my door, could smell cat urine. I figured it was probably a cat that was spraying the garage door or something. Anyways, a lady comes out and invites me in. Immediately when walking in, the smell got worse. Went through the mudroom to the main hallway, which has cat litter piled up the whole hallway on both sides with a small path between it to walk through. Walked in a little further, and in her computer room, same thing. All the sides are covered in dirty litter. I probably saw 10 cats, maybe more. I let her know I couldn't work in the conditions, walked out and puked. The ammonia smell was so terrible. Story 33. I do HVAC work on an AF base, and periodically we have maintenance on dorms rooms. This was by and large an achievement of filth. We get the key, do our rounds, and end up at the room in question. The first thing to hit us was the overwhelming stench of stale garbage, body odor, hot fridge, and mildew. Surprisingly, it was the least questionable aspect of this squatter's fever dream. Following that was mattress with only a comforter and bare pillow, full garbage bags, knee-high in the closet, that stereotypical slice of pizza on a plate with a bite taken out and left to rot, on the top shelf, in the closet, toilet bowl completely brown all the way to the rim, festooned with stray hair and crumbs, roaches living in the fridge, which was full of weird leftovers, like a glass half full of milk, dirty dishes stored in the oven, but the popped cherry on top were the overturned styrofoam bowls scattered all over the floor in each room, each one weighed down with a piece of jewelry or a small picture frame. Ruling out a summoning, we picked one up, only to find a live spider. Under each bowl, there was a bug, scrambling around, still alive, and all different from each other. I guess they just didn't want to kill them or throw them outside, but to keep them under a bowl indefinitely, it was so bizarre. We didn't even fix that. Story 34. I got a good one. I used to do computer repairs for a popular tech store, not Best Buy. We didn't normally do home calls, but every so often, some person would offer quite the hefty price for someone to come out and set crap up for them. Well, one day, we get a woman in who bought a sound system and a printer and computer, and she wants it all hooked up. We tell her we don't have that service, and she offers something to the tune of $200 side cash. And I like side cash. I tell my boss the deal, and he's cool with me going over to the house in the middle of my shift. I pull up and already regret hitting me like a wave of bad sushi. The yard is filled with junk. I'm talking about a few bathtubs and toilets, car tires, sofas, all that jazz. I get into the house, and I'm punched in the face by the odor of caked-in cigarette smoke that is laden into a film on almost everything in the house. In the house is a walkway that's nicely cut out of the stacks of junk, like a maze of all kinds of stuff, products she bought and never even opened. Bugs, including roaches, openly chilling on the walls, calm as pets. I walk through the winding path of trash and into what she called an office. I ask her where she wants this computer set up, and she points to my left and says, "Put it right there on that desk." Y'all, there was no damn desk, so I say, "What desk?" She walks over, puts her finger in a massive pile of junk and says, "It's right here." Not wanting to seem mean, I deflect and say, "Well, you want to clear a spot while I unbox this PC," instead of what I wanted to say, which was, "How about you clean that piece of crap off?" She clears the table off, partially. I go to put the computer down on it, but notice that the table has a massive hole in it, but like not a hole someone cut out. It's all black and soft, as if some kind of rot corroded through it. I'd say it smelled, but the house had such a choking cigarette smell that I couldn't notice. At this point, I'm so ready to leave that I just lay the computer over this thing and plug it in and turn it on. I go back to the car and get the soundbar, subwoofer, and bring it in to hook up to the TV, which isn't mounted on a wall or sitting on an entertainment center. No, it's balancing on some more trash. But since you rarely need to actually tough a TV, she has a whole field of trash between my cutout path and the TV on the trash hill. So I can't simply walk into Trash Mordor. I have to make this epic journey across the room to get to the trash tower. I pop the plugs into the TV, then try to kick away some garbage to clear a spot for the subwoofer to sit, when 2 dead cats are just chilling under some grubble. "Oh crap!" I exclaim. She looks over, sees what I see, and says, "Those aren't mine," in a super sincere and concerned voice. I am 300% done with this situation and just lay the subwoofer on top of the cats. Gently, though. I make the return journey through Trash Mordor back, or my safe path, collect my $200, and hit up my house for a shower before going back at work and telling the story Lord of the Things. The 2 cats. Story 35. While I've never personally had a job that required me to enter people's houses, I got to hear some pretty bizarre stories from a locksmith. Back when I was first contemplating a career change, becoming a locksmith was one of the paths I was considering. In addition to learning a bit about the trade, which really just amounted to learning how to pick locks, if I'm honest, I had a brief question and answer session with a local creator of keys. Most of the time, he told me, you're going to get simple and straightforward jobs. People losing apartment keys, forgetting combinations, that sort of thing. Sometimes you'll get interesting jobs. I had a call once where a guy trapped himself in a Foot Locker while trying to impress his boyfriend. totally naked. That was weird. Before continuing, he actually glanced up at the door as if to make sure nobody was about to enter his little shop. "Don't tell my wife about this," he said. But there's another kind of call you get a lot of. A woman calls and says her front door won't lock, or something. You show up and she's in a robe, or completely naked. Sometimes she flirts with you, sometimes she just walks around. Never had anything come of it, but it sure seems like a lot of women want to show off. Although the prospect of getting a free show every so often did seem appealing, I didn't end up pursuing the career. Something tells me that the shows themselves might not have been worth the ticket price. Still, it sounds like it would have made for some great stories. Story 36. My time to shine. I've been lucky enough to have 2 jobs that require me to go in houses. My first job is a house cleaner for a family member's property management business. I had a house where the dad had been arrested for CP, and they were trying to sell quickly. It was a nice 5-bedroom house from the outside, but inside was another story. It was like a horror movie. There were rooms of garbage, rooms from floor to ceiling. There was so much cat hair on the fans, on the vertical blinds, a carpet of cat hair on top of the actual carpet. Kitty litter ground into the linoleum that could not be removed. Worms in the cabinetry from spilled food. The bathrooms were an abomination. Urine-stained underwear, used condoms, brown toilets that used to be white, horrific smells, things in the bathtubs that would give you nightmares. It took me 2 weeks to clean that place. I was young and stupid and should have told my family to get one of those specialized cleaning teams. I bet I still have cat hair in my lungs. My second job as a PO has been occasionally pretty gross as well. Most people are reasonably clean and take care of their homes, but there is still a good number of people who don't. On my very first day of field training, I went to this house and turned a flashlight on the front window. It was late at night. The entire window moved. It was covered in roaches that scattered once they saw the light. I didn't know that many roaches could be in one home. I had another case where I was doing a walkthrough and roaches were falling from the ceiling. There were like 15 people living in the home. I don't know how they could live like that. I'd be afraid to sleep at night, just in case my mouth opened. I've gone to houses where they don't clean up after their animals, and my hair has smelled like cat pee for days after going inside for a few minutes. Houses with bathrooms covered in feces, houses with people who haven't showered in months. Hoarders' homes, homes of sex addicts with sex toys as far as the eye can see. I even had one house where they just kept stealing new clothes to wear and dumping the used clothes on the floor instead of doing laundry. There was literally about a foot of clothing on the entire floor, and they just walked on that like it was normal. I've gone to houses that weren't really houses. I've had people who live in huts or sharks with dirt floors. I didn't even know this still existed in the US. I even had one client who lived on a lawn chair on his family's property, which was bananas. I've had clients living in tents, under bushes, in shelters, or halfway houses. It is insane what people can endure, and bed bugs. Bed bugs for days. Story 37. Oh man, I don't even know where to start. Besides the hoarders and the bed bugs and the trash and the mold, the 2 things that get me the most are pets and pet food. Pets because I see people of all ages and all economic backgrounds with trashy houses, and almost all of them have pets. Almost none of them clean up after them. I am not talking about a little mess here. I have walked into houses where entire rooms are treated like the litter box. I may have mentioned this before, but I saw a guy that was hoarding computers. He had a few dozen computer cases with various components ripped out. All of them were older that I could tell. This was in 2013, and most of the cases were PI or PE. He also had a ton of cats. Cats crap in a lot of those cases. When I started this job, the guy that was training me was handing me supplies, and in one box was some Vicks Vapor Rub. I asked him what it was for. He said I would learn soon enough. You would put some on your upper lip when you walked into a house to kill the smell. That was the first time I had to do that. About the pet food, this is something I unfortunately see with older people on occasion. You see pet food, but no pets. I had to walk through this older man's house, and he had tons of cans of cat food, but not a pet to be seen. When we got to where his kitchen was, the spider webs covering the entryway were so thick we thought they were Halloween decorations at first. But the one place that always stood out to me was at an apartment complex. This older woman had an apartment that smelled so bad you could smell it from the hallway. She never answered the door. We were inspecting the entire complex, and we had to see what was going on in that place as well. The manager eventually broke the lock, and she wasn't there. Oh my God, the smell. Have you ever been in a room where there is so much piss it coats the door handles and wall? I have. The woman came home when we're done inspecting the place. Poor lady broke the handle on her bathroom door and was afraid to tell management because she thought she would get kicked out. She just used the kitchen instead. Let that sink in. The place where she made her food was inches away from human crap and pans of piss. We asked her how long ago did she break the door. She said 2 years. There was also a dead cat in there. Well, most of one anyway. 2 years of that. Obviously, we got her help. But just imagine how many people, young and old, live in conditions like that and no one ever knows. I have found that it doesn't matter the area or how old or young they are. Your next door neighbor could be living in a hellhole and you would never know. Story 38. I used to clean windows. We would go to our clients' homes in teams of two. One person would clean the inside and one would clean the outside. We were finished working on this house way out in the country, and I cleaned the outside so I didn't get to see the inside. My coworker tells me that the homeowner was this WW2 memorabilia collector and had a bunch of historic guns and pieces of history on display. He then proceeds to show me pictures he took of this guy's collection, only for me to see that the guy didn't have just a WW2 memorabilia collection on display, but a full-on neo-Nazi shrine, complete with a giant swastika banner, SS helmets, and German guns hanging on the wall. It had candles underneath burning. I don't know how my coworker didn't realize what he was looking at. Story 39. I saw a lot of filthy houses, but the weirdest one was a hoarder whose primary interest seemed to be newspapers. There are thousands, probably of newspapers, very neatly stacked floor to ceilings everywhere in the house, with just a small footpath between rooms. The place smelled a little musty, but wasn't gross. However, all I could wonder about was how likely an unlucky spark of static electricity could turn the entire place into a raging death trap inferno. Story 40. I used to be a carpet and flooring technician. We had many accounts with apartment complexes. When I was scheduled to go to a complex, I'd be given a set of keys with the work orders. They were always divided up by occupied, unoccupied, with notes like, "Big scary dog, do not enter if the tenant isn't home," and things of that nature. Well, one day I have an occupied clean with no notes about a dog being present in the home. Obviously, the tenant was trying to avoid paying a pet deposit. These situations were dangerous for obvious reasons. I get to the unit and knock, and there's no answer. I go into the unit and announce myself, and the only thing I hear is the familiar sound of a tail wagging against a metal crate. In the living room, I find this sweet little pup in his crate, and he's covered in his own crap. I'm telling you, this poor dog must have breakdanced in his crap. I felt awful for the poor dog. And although I'd usually still do the clean with the dog present, I couldn't leave the poor dog like that. I went back out to my van and grabbed some gloves, carefully took the pup out of his crate, gave him a bath, and cleaned the crate. Then I cleaned the carpets. Story 41. My grandfather runs a secondhand furniture store and arrived at a house to pick up a wardrobe he previously agreed to be by. He rung the doorbell several times, but nobody answered. My granddad then looked through the window of the house, trying to see if he could notice anybody that could let him inside. While looking through the window, he saw the very same wardrobe that he was there to collect tipped over onto the floor. He started to get suspicious and called the number that the person selling the wardrobe gave to him. It happened to be the daughter of the owner of the house. She explained that her father must have left the house without telling her, and that her, alongside her brother and husband, will be over to let him in and take payment for the wardrobe. They arrived and opened the door, entering before my grandfather. Before he could even step foot in the house, the daughter started screaming and ran down the street. Either the brother or husband came out, I don't know which exactly, and told my granddad that the wardrobe had fell on top of the owner of the house and that he wasn't breathing. My granddad decided that he would give them space to deal with what had happened and that if they wanted him to come back and get it another day, he'd happily do it. Luckily, he never actually saw the whole body, just the feet hanging out into the corridor. He's 76 and seen some stuff in his time, but he describes this as the most unnerving he's ever felt. For all he knew at the time, somebody could push that wardrobe onto the guy and killed him. Turns out the guy had a heart attack and grabbed onto the closest thing to him. At some point, he must have lost his balance and brung the whole thing down on top of him. Just goes to show anything can happen. Story 42. Met house. I'm self-employed, and sometimes when the bills need to get paid, but I'm not finding work, I'll take odd jobs. I asked a friend who's a foreman on electrician jobs if they needed help, and he told me that they didn't. But he had something I could do for money. Enter Met house. Stage left. He owned a small house out in the country that he had rented to a step-sibling. While he was away, she drifted into full-on med addiction, and when he returned, he had to evict her. I would clean out the trash and separate items that could go to the dump from the burnable items. He'd pay me $1,000. He warned me that it was dirty enough to be dangerous, but that he'd provide gloves, tools, and a respirator face mask. I took the job. I showed up and couldn't believe my eyes. The mask was 100% necessary. I could smell animal excrement from about 20 feet outside the house. Trash was piled at least waist high in every, and I mean every room or space that wasn't occupied by the strange dog kennel labyrinth that wound its way through the living room. A spare room was obviously dedicated as an animal bathroom, since letting them out would have been too much effort. Feces were almost a foot deep in some places. I don't think I could venture to guess how many dogs had been crapting and pissing in that room, or for how long. I tucked my overalls into my work boots and still had to go through a can of off every day. I was there to keep the literally millions, possibly billions of fleas within manageable range. I attempted to pull up the carpet in the main room only to discover that it was inches of matted dog hair stuck to the laminate flooring. Thousands of needles littered the floors underneath all the filth. Thankfully not in the animal areas, though. Food, bio-waste, you name it, it was on the floor. It took about a week, but I got it all out of there. When I started, I was worried about snakes and critters. But it was so disgusting that the only insects I saw inside the house were fleas. I've never seen anything close on hoarders or in any fictional depiction of a Met house. The money was good, though. Story 43. Not nearly as bad as some others. But I had a job in healthcare where I had to visit people who were generally low income and not in good health. I'm brand spanking new to the job in the field when I decide to go visit Bob. It's our first visit in his home, and Bob is usually pretty well dressed, friendly, and articulate, so I expected a normal house, if you will. He lived in a trailer park outside of city limits that I knew, but so had many other people in my life who weren't quite like Bob. So anyway, I notice crap is about to get real when I drive up his driveway and notice there's various dogs and cats littered throughout the yard, clothes hanging outside to dry. This was not good sunny weather, though, and the front screen door is very broken. I looked over to the backyard and there's several broken down vehicles, bikes, etc., but none looked to be in working condition. It took a while to notice, but I also realized that the various bits of broken glass on the ground were in fact beer bottles that had been busted. Why right there in his own yard? Dunno. Not safe for animals, IMO, but Bob doesn't really think about these things. I can already see that inside the house, as soon as you walk in, there's a king-size bed with a damn mountain of clothes covering it from inch to inch, and more furry creatures sleeping here and there. I love cats, and can definitely tolerate dogs. But this home was too much for me. The smell of animal was rancid. There were various pan-style litter boxes, no covers, and just litter and feces scattered throughout the home. There was only a path to go through his house. From the door you enter, to the kitchen, the bathroom, and finally to the back room that used to be his bedroom until he cluttered it up so much. He just closed the door and forgot about it. Never went back in, but nothing ever came back out. I remember asking Bob why he kept all of these things, and his answer was so simple, but never made much sense to me. What if I need it? I won't have it if I throw it away. This applied to anything from old newspapers to rotten food. Story 44. It's a tie. First is the house where I was pet sitting, and the woman only wanted me to come in once a day for a small herd of something like 6 or 7 Chihuahuas and Pomeranians. They were all closed into the kitchen, and of course trampled all through their crap and piss. The whole damn house reeked. I felt so sorry for those damn dogs. Second was the house where there were piles and boxes about 4 feet high, all over the entire house. I don't take offense to clutter, but having a damn maze though your entire house, and there were cat hairballs all over the bed and bedroom floor, like about 10 or 12 that had been there for ages. Story 45. A while back. Must be 2007-08. I was working as a healthcare assistant via an agency for an old fellow who was in the final horror show of motor neuron disease. He was ventilated and fully locked in, no movement apart from he could squint his left eye somewhat. This is how he communicated through a gridded board with the alphabet. This took time to get the gist of what he wanted to say. He could also grind his teeth. Now this fellow had a wife who was a tad psychosis prone. She used to run away with his credit card and be found a week later in Paris. This happened a few times. She was always decent with me and thought I probably would want an escape too if that was my lot in life. So my watch for the night shift began as normal. His wife had self-medicated with vodka, and I put him to bed. Roll on 3 hours later, I hear the call from him to come into the dimly lit bedroom. This was the teeth grind over a baby monitor. I go in and head round to his side of the bed to begin the board communication. Next thing I know, the wife throws the covers off stark naked and was, well, fudding herself silly with a big old black sex toy. I locked eyes with my client and he started to go through the board. I've never stared at someone's eyes so intensively as I did for those excruciating 4 minutes that it took him to say his piece. Unfortunately, it only took her 3 to bang one out in front of me. The unkempt muff of a crazed 58 years old will haunt me to my grave. Oh, and he wanted me to tell her to stop hitting his leg with her rubber sex toy. Did not get paid enough on that job. Story 46. Paramedics here. We were called to a guy blacked out on his own doorstep. We turned up and gave him a shake. Nothing seriously wrong, just too much to drink. He lets himself into the house, apologizes for the lack of lights, and tells us that there are some candles in the living room if we'll just follow him. I head down the dark corridor behind him, while my partner flicks on a torch. There is blood everywhere. On the floor and pools, there are soaked towels lying around. There's handprints and smears down the walls. The patient is blithely continuing on down the corridor to the living room. I can see what is clearly a kid's room at the end of the corridor. Disney princess wallpaper, doll's house. I say to my partner, I'm going in there. If he comes out of the living room, yell and we'll run for it. While I'm in the kid's room, I hear my partner talking to someone else. Out of one of the other bedrooms comes a woman wearing only a very short t-shirt. Her legs are covered in blood. She tells us she's been having a bad period for a few weeks now and isn't sure whether she should see a doctor. Yes, lady. Yes, you should see a doctor. Get in the ambulance. We'll take you there. and then we're going to go and shower. Story 47. We do mitigation work, including biohazard cleanup after dies, murders, natural deaths, and any kind of hazard cleanup. Anyways, we were called by property manager of a house to clean up for a family that had one of their children pass away and asked us to dispose of the contents, clean up the room, and get it back to a livable condition. The son was a 20-something-year-old male that was a paraplegic with possibly some other medical issues. The family kept him in the garage with deadbolts locking him in, had a pet fence around a mattress on the ground. The mattress was covered in blood, feces, urine stains. You could tell that a lot of this was there for a long time. He had a pile of what we assumed was his clothes and things. No TV, personal items, or a way to communicate to anyone else that we could see. The garage was not completely converted to a room and still used for storage and normal yard garage tools. The house had a problem with rodents, and there were rats and feces from the rats throughout the garage and house. I prefer not to know how the son was treated or what the exact cause of death was, but yet, I still wonder and think about it from time to time. I could write a book of all the disgusting things I've seen from numerous hoarders, rodents, insects, city main sewage backups affecting whole apartments buildings, bodily fluids, and parts from dies. But the worst is still how that person was treated living in that garage. Story 48. My husband works a job where he goes into customers' houses to do furniture protection and carpet cleaning. We live in a big city, so most of his gross stories involve bugs, usually roaches, inside people's houses. Typically, under the area rug or couch, he is there to service. But his best story is of a lady he had to visit several times, multiple pieces of furniture being serviced over a period of time. And the last time he visited her, he said the apartment smelled like rotting, sickly poo. She apologized for the smell and explained that the cat had been sick recently and was crapping everywhere in the apartment, and she herself had been too sick to clean it up. So there were just little rotting piles everywhere that he says were like little crap landmines that he had to avoid stepping on. But as an appropriate one-up story, my husband's best friend does the same job as him, and his best story is similar to my husband's. Best friend gets to the customer's house, sees a couple of little crap landmines in the corner and says, "Oh, I think your cat may have had an accident over here." And customer says, "Oh no, that was me. I forgot to put my diaper on this morning." _. Story 49. This isn't mine, but something a coworker told me about at his previous job. He was a property claims adjuster. Had a lady call and said that her husband took his own life. He was trying to be nice and telling he was sorry and such. And he would come out today to look at the property so this gets resolved as quickly as possible. He was trying to help since the last thing you want to think about is insurance after your husband dead. So he goes to the house and she's a bit solemn. She takes him into the bedroom and says he's shot dead in the bathroom. The billet came into the bedroom through the wall and then through the roof. He's taking pictures and making notes and asks to see the bathroom to take some pictures. She leads him there and walks in and boom, dead body still in the bathroom with blood everywhere. Instant gag reflex. He asks her when this happened and she said this morning. He followed up with, "Have you called the police?" And she replied, "Not yet." He left. She got her claim paid. Story 50. Oh yeah, the dog piss denial lady. The super nice lady whose floor I was installing wanted me to take a look at a leak that she had at the bottom of some stairs. Immediately noticed that the leak is far from any pipes and smells strongly of dog cat piss. Gently query if there is any chance her pets may be urinating on the wall. The stress of work in the home can often cause behavior issues. Nope, she's sure they never pee in the house. Okay, I rip out the drywall and replace it. Wood behind is dry, so no active leak. Come back to texture, the new drywall is wet. Stinks of piss. I ask again, trying to kindly tell her that her pets are pissing on the wall. Nope, they don't do that. I get it dried out, spray it with mold inhibitor and smell killer, and shoot texture prime. Come back to paint, it's wet again, smells like piss. At this point, I straight up tell her that something is pissing on her wall. Maybe it's not her pets or her, but it's getting soaked with piss every couple days somehow. I can't guarantee the work in those conditions. No problem. Get paid. She wants me to look at the upstairs bathroom. Go take a look. Can barely stay in the room, piss and crap everywhere in full view. How can you not know your pets are pissing and crapting everywhere? Story 51. I painted a house where all the doors locked from the outside, but no way to unlock it from the inside, except the master bedroom. This was a 5-bedroom house plus 3 rooms in the basement. There were pills scattered in each room, ranging from antidepressives to sedatives. Some areas of the bedrooms were urine-stained and smelled really bad. It made you not want to touch anything in the house. The basement was infested with fleas and bedbugs. Without knowing, I and a few of the other guys happened to have stowaway bedbugs that we took home. It was a nightmare to get rid of. The basement bathroom had a cabinet full of dirty adult diapers, and the toilet water always flushed murky. All the carpets were dirty and matte. I'm not good at describing it, but the condition of that house was horrendous. Turns out the tenants that used to live there adopted kids to get money from the government, and the kids were kept sedated at all times. I don't know how many in all there were in the house, but the foster parents were arrested. After day 2, I asked my boss to hand the job to someone else as I couldn't continue working on that project. Story 52. Where do I begin? I do inspections on foreclosed homes. I've literally seen it all. Massive collections of sex toys sprawled across a bedroom floor. I think I have a picture of this somewhere. Houses where cats were using the entire interior of the home as a litter box homes, where squatters just crap in the toilets with no running water. So it's literally a porcelain bowl full of human crap. And the one that made me uncomfortable for days, poke my head in a room and see a sheet spread on the floor with a pillow leaning up against the wall. Start thinking to myself, maybe we have another squatter situation. Then I see the box of bullets on the floor. Then I see the melon-sized hole in the dry wall, and then the brown dried-up brain matter smeared all over the wall. Then I remembered the black cat that I had encountered in the backyard that had popped out of a pile of leaves and wouldn't take his eyes off me as I walked the exterior. Never felt more uneasy as I drove away from that property. Story 53. She worked for a HOA and had to go turn off the water at a recently abandoned house at the permission of the bank as a pipe in the pool house busted. The guy just up and left one day, putting all his more valuable crap in a trailer and leaving. In the middle of his hunting room, in the basement, full of pictures of his game and so on, was a large tank under a "Don't Tread on Me" flag, and in the tank was a long, dead 5-foot snake that couldn't handle either the lack of food or the now freezing temperatures. The place reeked as he also had dead feeder fish and a dead turtle. The floor had piles of maggots, including a large pile from 100 pounds of deer in a standing freezer. The wood floors were warped from years of dog piss as well. Houses in this area typically sell for $400,000. This one sold for $160,000 due to the massive damage his hoarding lifestyle. Story 54. I'll go a slightly different direction than most of the disgusting things here. The parents of a friend of mine sold their house really fast and hadn't closed on their new one yet. A neighbor said they could use their house because they were out of town for a while, wintering in Florida or something. This house was a monument to slavery. It was incredible. The house was decorated like a plantation, horribly racist paintings everywhere. Turns out the neighbor was super racist and they just had no idea. Story 55. On a phone, so sorry for the formatting. I worked in pest control for a couple years right after college and have a couple houses that stood out. One was an older house that had been split into 2 apartments, one above the other. The upstairs tenants had been fighting a roach problem for several months with no luck, so the landlord decided to treat the entire house. It turns out the gal, living in the lower apartment, Hal, 2 large dogs and stored their dry food in a large wooden bin. Now, dry dog food is like prime rib for roaches, and with a large food supply, the roach population had exploded. We decided to nuke the apartment by sealing it up and gassing it with a fogger that you set up and left it on until it emptied about a quart's worth oily pesticide that would seep into the walls and ceiling, killing everything, and then go in and retrieve it 24 hours later. And yes, both apartments had to be evacuated. The next day, the roach apocalypse left about 3 inches of dead roaches throughout the entire kitchen where the dog food bins were, and up to 6 inches deep or more next to the walls. Story 56. I work at a grocery store, and we do deliveries to people's houses. One house I delivered to, in their house, they had all those TV infomercial items that you see on TV. It just looked like a house you'd see on that show Hoarders. Then, when I was leaving, she asked me to take a security top off of a bottle of whiskey that was clearly stolen. Story 57. I have an elderly neighbor that is a hoarder. At one point, aside from all the piles of stuff laying around, the roaches were so bad you could have them dropping off the ceiling on you. There were literally hundreds. Sad part is, she isn't the worst in the complex. Story 58. Not me, but my dad. My dad sells insurance, and he went into this lady's home to talk to her about an insurance plan. When he first walked into the home, the house smelled pretty bad. But he had been homes that were bad before, so that didn't faze him. What he did notice was that there are little bits of poop scattered across the floor, but couldn't see a dog anywhere. Maybe the dog was hiding, she thought. He's sitting down and talking to her when a little kid comes out. Couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Turns on the TV to watch cartoons. The kid eventually stands up, pulls down his pants, takes a squat and takes a crap on the carpet, pulls up his pants and then takes a step to the side and sits back down. My dad is sitting there as disbelief, and the lady keeps on talking like nothing is wrong. Story 59. I used to help my dad out, and we would go to apartment complexes to inspect them for carpet cleaning. We went one day to one that was pretty nasty, smelled awful, but cleanable. As soon as the hot water started hitting, thousands of maggots started surfacing. That's the only time I've ever thrown up from just the sight of something. Story 60. Dropping off a little brother back home, Mom was nodded out with some dude on the couch, Riggs still on the coffee table. Kid wasn't there much longer. Story 61. I work in residential management. Seeing animals destroy a unit with feces and urine is not uncommon, which is why we don't even charge a deposit anymore. It's just a monthly tack-on to your rent. Generally, About 50% of the units I go into have some funky smell and are filled full of garbage. It's probably correlated to the fact that these people move much more frequently, so I don't see a lot of the nice units. Those people tend to rent a little longer term. Anyway, generally, less and less I see things that shock me. The worst wasn't me, but my dad. He got me into the business. He once entered a suite where there was a leak coming from a unit above. Only the leak wasn't water. They entered the suite above. In our jurisdiction, it's legal to enter a suite without notice if you believe some sort of emergency, such as a flood, exists. They found a guy who had been hacked up in the bathtub by dealers. What was leaking into the apartment below was blood. Story 62. Did a bit of construction work as a teenager, and one house we remodeled was pretty bad. The owner was an indoor chain smoker for 20+ years, and I got sent in to do demo work. The carpet was the absolute worst. It likely hadn't been replaced in all that time, and while ripping it out, I felt like an ant in an ashtray. The smell was so bad. Ended up demoting a bunch of sheetrock in what was clearly the primary smoking room, because even after 3 coats of base layer, it still stank like stale cigarettes. The moldy sheetrock in the basement was an absolute joy to demo compared to the rest of the house, because at least they didn't smoke down there. I completed most of my work in midwinter with every window in the house open during the day because otherwise it was going to require a respirator. Story 63. Once went with my bro and his worker to put some carpet in a house. We had to use trash bags as gloves. Never seen that before. We did this cause of cat-pissed carpet. Kitchen filled with old boxes of cereal. I'm talking about boxes with holes in the corners and carton peeling off. Stacked boxes of soda that had to be old. Designs were not up to date from what I remember. Washer dryer room had soaked carpet, probably a leak, and it was squishy to say the least. Furniture hadn't been moved in years. The kicker? The garage. There was a literal pile of trash there. I almost threw up. Neighbor came up to me while I was at the truck getting an oxygen break. He said he feels for us and that they've complained to the city, but won't do anything since she's elderly. I think I showered 3 times that night and threw away the clothes I was wearing. Story 64? When I used to work for ServiceMaster cleaning up old box smells from sewer backups. It's the damn worst smell ever, makes you want to puke. Oh, and my dad used to clean up the aftermath of when people were murdered, died, or committed death while working with ServiceMaster. Story 65. M's here. 60 Yorkies, 60, in a 3-bedroom house. They were not allowed outside for fear of them getting stolen. All I will say is you could smell it coming up the street, and I made the patient remove his cescorts and pants prior to entering the squad. It'll let your imagination fill in the rest. Story 66. When I used to be a private tutor, I'd gone to a child's house. Both his parents are well-known doctors in the area. And there were, no joke, dirty panties, plural, on the table, dirty socks on the kitchen counter, boxer shorts on the floor, and the bathroom smelled like the toilet had never been flushed before. Not what I was expecting walking into a penthouse flat owned by 2 doctors. Story 67. They literally had multiple large dogs in the house that they let crap on the floor. It got so bad that multiple neighbors filed a complaint with the city about the odor coming from the house. Story 68. I work in the building inspection office. I've seen leaking sewage pipes, unsupported gas meters in the middle of an excavation, houses being raised to add a foundation supported on half the bracing they should, garbage piled sky high from the hoarding, homeowners creating excessive runoff and erosion into their neighbor's property, asbestos insulation hanging from the pipes in the basement of a future food service place, clear evidence of fires covered up. That was in one afternoon. Story 69. My really close friend went on a Mormon mission. A woman who is pretty immobile due to her weight called and wanted some Mormon missionaries to come and tell her about the church. The house was pretty messy, but the missionaries happily sat and answered her questions. All of a sudden, a huge cockroach ran across the floor. The woman swung her arm, smooshing it with her bare hand, and then she frantically licked and swallowed the smooshed roach off of her hand. I can't even imagine the mental problems that someone would have to make them do that. Strange thing is that she seemed rather cognitively sharp. Story 70? Answered a similar post. Last week I used to install windows and doors in people's homes. Anyways, one day I got sent to install at a guy's house. Before I left the shop, I was told to be ready for the smell at this guy's house. I get there and knock at his door. When he opens it, I almost puke. It smelled like cigarettes, dog cat piss, and crap. I had to deal with the smell for around 2 hours. After I was done, I went home, showered, and washed my clothes. Story 71? I was in a house where the folks had replaced the panels on the cabinet doors with chicken wire and were keeping chickens right there in the kitchen. There were feathers and crap everywhere on the counters. Lots of fresh eggs, though.